Welcome back to World Builders Guild. Today we're going to be talking about making your world unique. What do I mean by uniqueness? Uniqueness can be anything from a feature of the world to a race you add in. It can also be a way people and creatures interact in your world, such as the Na'vi and Avatar. For my world, the major unique thing is the event that wipes out civilization continuously as it makes its way around the world. There are other ways to add uniqueness. For example, if you add in a whole race it'll be difficult now because that's one of the major things people have done to make their worlds unique is, oh, here's this new race. So you'd have to really sit down and think about what this race would mean for your people, for your world, to make it feel unique. Now, why do you want your world to feel unique? This is the major thing that will distinguish your story from another. If you don't have uniqueness in your story, it'll feel too similar to stories told by others. Now, being similar to a story is not bad, as story elements become classic for a good reason. But if there's too much similarity or no real difference, then your writing will feel lazy. And again, if you're DMing for the first time, that's okay. Take the lazy writing route because DMing comes with a whole lot of different difficulties. Telling a classic story for once is not going to lessen the experience of your players, especially not in the case of a new DM. But without that exception, as you become more advanced in DMing or you're writing to tell a story, you're really going to want uniqueness. But you also want uniqueness because that is what will help you to develop a better story. You will be able to sit down and think about what your unique thing is and how that affects your world, how that affects your story, and that will go in to affect your characters, and that will help you have a very realistic feeling story, even if the thing that's unique is absolutely ridiculous. Now, how do you add uniqueness? So what I do is I will take a look at the world around me, think about a change and how that would affect the world. Don't always use it, but for example, what if the ground around us was not solid? What would that mean? Well, that would mean that the way we build buildings would be completely wrong. The way we travel wouldn't work the way we do now. Boats would be a lot more, they would be necessary. But what if that not solid doesn't answer the full question? Water's a liquid, so is magma. So is honey. So what if the material affected the density, which would affect its viscosity, making it harder to move through some things and easier to move through others? That would mean instead of cars, we'd have small, personalized boats that had a lot of horsepower to move us through a denser liquid than, for example, on the ocean where you don't need that kind of horsepower because the water is easier to split. But our roads would be different. We'd probably try and fill them with water in some way or shape. And then, so you can take that and you can go down this line. How does that affect the story then? Well, if the ground around us is liquid, that means there's a lot of boat travel. If there's a lot of boat travel, then maybe you could have more aquatic encounters or even more unique aquatic encounters for me, like say with D&D. A lot of the creatures would need to be changed slightly to have swim speeds or be more aquatic. Races with swim speeds would have an advantage sometimes. Falling is still very deadly because of how water works, but not necessarily how other liquids work. Does it change anything else? Land battles wouldn't exist. So it would all be a sea battle, but not really, because we're talking about a denser, a thicker liquid. So how does that work? Most likely small individual encounters on smaller ships powered by the people themselves in a fantasy setting without motors. Maybe you have some kind of magical ships that float on top. Those would be more expensive. They could move faster, so they'd be more of a reserve unit. And you don't want that to get destroyed because it would cost you too much. But that kind of battle would actually be really conducive to a D&D game. If you wanted to have a large scale battle, it'd actually just be a bunch of small scale battles. Maybe a 6 versus 6 situation. It would be harder to gang up on smaller nations if everything was liquid. Because you can only fit. You could field a lot of boats, sure, but you couldn't fight them at the same time. While you would have more reserves, if they have more endurance, it's not going to matter. And so that really changes a lot of things once you start thinking about it. It changes how military training works depending on the size of the nation. It changes the thoughts of resources. It changes how things are used. It changes sea trade, land in quotation marks since there is no really land. It changes how buildings are built. There would be more floating things. Places would not be necessarily in the same place every time. Because if there's any kind of current, they would move. And so that would make finding somewhere a little bit more difficult. Unless it's anchored down. And maybe the anchored down places would grow bigger. And that could be another interesting change in the world. If there's a really big city, you know it's always going to be where it's going to be. But the smaller cities aren't anchored and they can move. And that would change really how national borders work. And you see how a simple look around, decide a change can lead to a very unique sounding world. I mean, that sounds like a pretty cool world. Similar to Waterworld, but not exactly the same because we're talking about different densities and we're talking about a forever situation. It has always been this way. This is how life developed. But anyway, that's all I had to say today on uniqueness. I know this was a slightly shorter video than normal. School just started up recently. Get my schedule set up. It'll probably be most weeks a video 3 times a week. I'll try and push 4 when I can. But other than that, thank you for watching. If you like this kind of content, you want to see more, please remember to like and subscribe. It helps me out. It really doesn't cost you anything but a little bit of time. And I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.